It's a little bit in my glasses, but not too much. I don't like that at all. I don't like that at all. We'll give it a few minutes to populate. So, to see some chat come in. So, are we live? We are. Oh, welcome everyone. Sorry about the sort of uneventful start here, but I have to welcome you to a new place. If you've been part of our chats before, you've seen me in my kitchen at my home. Tonight, I'm at our restaurants and I'm in my office above the restaurants. So it doesn't look particularly attractive. So I apologize for that, but we are going to tackle a bunch of question and answer things here. And we have a few questions that we have chosen here. And first of all, I want to say thank you to everyone for joining us. And thank you for sending in the questions at the beginning, but feel free to continue to send things to it. Casey Cora, my right hand in all of this, is going to be taking the questions off of the chat and sending them to me on my trusty phone here, and I will be reading them from my phone. But we're going to start with the ones that have been sent out at the beginning. And I apologize to everyone that I don't get a chance to answer your questions. We try to do our best to do this rapid fire and get through as many questions as we possibly can. And again, thank you for joining us. Okay, so the first one is from Jerry Dixon. Chef, here's my question for you. I've tried dried chile de árbol and dried guajillo chilies. I also have guajillo powder and árbol powder. Can you give an example of when you would use the powder instead of the dried chilies? That is a really great question. Always use the chili pods if you can. The chili powders are used more as an accent to sprinkle on top of things, or perhaps to make chorizo. Some people like to use the powder for chorizo. I like to actually use the whole pods for chorizo, but because of the moisture, so usually when you're working with the chili pods, you're going to toast them and then you're going to soak them and then you're going to puree them so you have a paste. That's not the best thing when you're making chorizo because it adds too much water to things. And then again, if you're making white pozole, like they love in many places in Mexico, that white pozole, you want to just sprinkle a little chili over the top of it. It's not going to be a paste that you put on top of it. It's actually going to be the powder that goes on top of it. When you're talking about, well, probably a lot of you use tahine. So tahine is a mixture of salt, dehydrated lime, and chili powder. And so that sprinkles on fruit or on jicama, pretty much anything that you want to rim a glass for making a margarita. Those are the places that you would find the powder. The powder will always be somewhat oxidized and not as flavorful as the pods. So if you're making a dish, use the pods. Second question, Gregory Gable, Gabel. Hello, I have a name brand pressure cooker and I have not really used it. I always default to using my rather large array of cast iron. Good choice. What do you think about pressure cooking, please? I believe it may be useful for large groups, and that's about it. No, I don't really think it's about large groups that we're talking here. It's much more about trying to get through something that's a little bit faster than what you could do. So if time is of the essence, then I suggest that you use your pressure cooker. Now, if you have something that's an electric pressure cooker, like an Instant Pot, those are super useful, and I find just more comfortable to use. I have a stovetop pressure cooker and I have an Instant Pot, but I always default to the Instant Pot. So at Thanksgiving time, when I am making really, really beautiful stock to make a gravy out of, oftentimes I will do it in the Instant Pot because in 1 hour I can get the equivalent of what it would take 4 hours on my stovetop. So I like that better. But I will say that the Instant Pot, Well, I like beans cooked better slowly in a heavy pot because I get whole beans. If I do beans in the pressure cooker, typically too many of them are too broken up, which is totally fine if you're going to mash the beans and make refritos, but not if you're trying to have beautiful beans. Sometimes, like when I'm cooking in Mexico City, in my apartment in Mexico City, we're at 7,500 feet and it takes like 4 hours to cook a pot of beans. So I'll default to the pressure cooker all the time because it's such an easy way to quickly get things done. If I need to, say, boil some beef until I can shred it, well, it will take me 3 or 4 hours to do that in Mexico City at that altitude. But in Chicago, I live at a sea level, and it's just way easier sometimes just to put something on the back of the stove and let it just simmer away. Okay, next question here is from Pablo Padilla. How do you stay in great shape surrounded by such excellent food? Any recommendations on staying fit? Several. I will say number one, always surround yourself with good food. Do not ever think about good food as the deterrent to staying fit or staying in a healthy at a healthy weight. Okay, when you deny yourself good food, that's when you crave it and you tend to binge. At least I do. I mean, I'm just telling you about my own personal experience here. So I say surround yourself with really good food all the time and make it plentiful. And then you find yourself being satisfied with really good food. And I know that is goes completely contrary to what all the nutritionists and so forth will tell you and the fitness gurus and so forth. But I want to say that good food is at the essence of good health. Satisfy yourself with really good food. Okay, the stuff that comes with calorie counts on them and says this is a 100 calorie packet will not satisfy you like something really delicious will. So I think that usually when the food has been manufactured in such a way that it will give you exact calorie counts, it's probably not going to be as satisfying as whole foods will. That's number one. Second thing is make well I'm super lucky and I acknowledge this completely. I am so lucky because I love to be physically active. Okay, some people find it a real chore, but I don't. If I'm not physically active, then I find myself like I can't get my head on straight. I can't think straight. I can't do the projects that I want to do. But for me, because I have a very act or have had a very active yoga practice, I think most of you know I've had shoulder surgery, so my yoga practice is sort of strange these days, but it's there every day. I love it. And so for me, I like yoga. I do this. I live really near this great trail. And so I go on these really fast walks and jogs on that trail. And when I come back from that, all of a sudden I've like, it helps me think. And so I love that part. I just love to feel physically active. And so my encouragement is just this. And I say this to everybody: if you find something physical you like to do, then that is your thing. Don't read the magazines that tell you what you should be doing. Do the thing you like to do because you're much more likely to do it. So that's my feeling about those things. Okay, next question here is from James. What molcajete do you recommend? Are there different types for different uses? There are not different types for different uses. They're all pretty much the same. Look for one that's super heavy, dark colored, and holds at least three cups of quantity in the main bowl. Okay. Now, the reason that you want to have one that is heavy is because that means it's made of really solid basalt. Basalt is that really dense lava rock. So it can be made out of lightweight lava rock or dense and heavy lava rock. The lightweight stuff is what they sell to tourists to put on their mantles. If you want something that you can use, it needs to be super heavy. The super heavy stuff is always a darker gray than the lightweight stuff. The lightweight stuff will be a very sort of pale gray, and it will clearly look more like a decorative thing. And I say 3 cups because if you're going to make salsa de molcajete, which is crushed roasted tomatoes, roasted serrano or jalapeno chiles, roasted garlic that you're crushing in there, you're going to want to make about 2 cups of it, and you need 3 cups capacity to do that. So I always suggest to do that. I haven't looked very recently, but at mexgrocer.com, they used to sell a really good traditional molcajete. Also, if you live near a good grocery store, Mexican grocery store, they will sell the ones for the Mexican clientele that are really useful. So I always suggest that you just go and look there. From John Crane, are you going to do a turkey this week, this year? We need some good ideas for sides. So, of course, I'm going to do a turkey. I'm not the right one to ask for this at all. Because I do this really traditional dinner that my grandmother made, and it's the only time that I ever make that, and it's sort of like a traditional, well, homage to my grandmother. And so we make smoked turkey because I grew up in a barbecue restaurant, and we do potatoes and dressing, and it's pretty standard, but I love it. So now, all that aside, I will tell you 2 things that I do that I think are really good. One of them is to make a cranberry chipotle relish, and this is the way that I do it. I put the cranberries in a small pot on the stove with a little bit of sugar, medium amount of sugar, sort of like, because they're so tart and you want to bring out their fruitiness. So I put some sugar in there, and I lightly cook them until they all pop. And then I let that cool off. I add some orange juice and orange zest to that. I chop up a canned chipotle chili, and I stir that into that. And the last thing that I do is to chop up jicama and add it to that cranberry. And that is my addition to my grandmother's meal, and I absolutely love it. I think it's just one of the best condiments that you could have. I make a big, like a quart of it, and we only eat maybe 2 cups of it. And then I've got the other 2 cups in my refrigerator to do the smoked turkey sandwiches with that cranberry chipotle jicama relish on them, which I think is just really delicious. Now, the second thing that I'll say is that I make a chipotle salsa with roasted tomatillos, and that just to make that chipotle salsa with roasted tomatillos and put it over cubed up pumpkin or butternut squash, better with butternut squash, honestly, and just cover it with a little bit of the salsa, cover it and put it in the oven and let it just cook until it's completely tender. Then uncover it, let it brown a little bit on the top, and that is also a really, really delicious side if you're looking for things with Mexican flavor. Next question comes from Frank Rodriguez. Have you ever recreated a meal from the wedding scene in like Water for Chocolate? Oh, too many times. Okay, so when that movie came out, well, actually, when the book came out, before the movie came out, every Valentine's Day, we did an homage to Like Waters for Chocolate. And it was a set meal, and people came to our restaurant for it. And we did the quail with the rose petal sauce, and we did that wonderful layered tortilla dish with the mole and the cream and the cheese in it. Those are the 2 dishes that I remember the most, other than the cake. I mean, the cake is always problematical to recreate there because the cake is what made everyone sick in the movie. So here we are making this cake, and I think all of our diners thought they were going to get sick because that's what happened in the movie. I will tell you that if you want to recreate the menu, because when you read the book, every chapter starts with or at least most of the chapters start with a recipe. And so you start cooking and you realize that she only gives you the first half of the recipe. The rest of it, you have to know how to cook. And so I spent lots of time reading and researching and trying to figure out how these dishes were supposed to be finished. So it's a little harder than you might think it is, but I will tell you that it is fun to do. And we chose to do it on Valentine's Day because it's such a beautiful and sort of fraught love story. From Kurt Penner, we have what rice is used to make the most common Mexican style rice, short grain arborio or other. Okay, so there are most people use long grain rice like in the United States and in Mexico now because everybody's been told that long grain rice is better than short grain rice. And that is totally just a cultural thing. And it's sort of fashionable. And I think you should just stop that. Long grain rice is no better than any other rice at all. Maybe people like it because they think that it's not going to be so sticky. So there is a rice that is part of it has its own DOC, a denomination of origin. Okay. And it comes from just south of Mexico City in the state of Morelos. And Morelos rice is famous. It is not long grain rice. It is shorter than long grain rice, but not as short as short grain rice like arborio or a sushi rice. It is a medium grain rice. But the difference between long grain rice and medium grain rice is huge. So I love medium grain rice because I think that long grain rice can taste dry and medium grain rice has more of a chew to it, and it's more delicious to eat, I think. Arborio rice is a shorter grain rice. It is, I think, completely classified as short grain rice by the rice people. So what I use is this medium grain rice, a little bit longer than that arborio rice, but you could use that if you want to make Mexican rice. Now, in my book, Mexico One Plate at a Time, I go super deep into rice. And if you want to read more about it, that's where I would send you to read all of the details. We tested rice, both the ones that come from Mexico and the ones that we have in the United States. We did 55 tests on rice. And all of the details, if you are interested in all my geekiness, then all the details are right there. From Andrew Cole, I saw an old video of you cooking on Julia Child's show. That is a really old video. What was it like meeting her for the first time? It was one of the most emotional experiences of my life because you have to understand that I was the kid at 11 years old. She came on the television. So when I was 11 years old, it was 1964. We were watching black and white television, and it was the educational channel. And she came on there with the French Chef Show. And I grew up in a restaurant and I loved to cook and I spent lots of my time, but it was a barbecue restaurant and we did our things from scratch and we're super proud of it. But Julia taught me that there was a whole world of cuisine out there that was bigger than what the world was that I grew up in. And my grandmother was a really great cook, but she was a traditional sort of Southern cook. And she made really delicious stuff. But at the same time, Julia showed me that there could be precision and elegance brought to things that I had never experienced before. And I was just a Julia Child fanatic. At 12, my Christmas present that I asked for was Mastering the Art of French Cooking, Volume 1. There was no Volume 2 at that time, but I got the first one and I cooked all the way through it. Much to my family's dismay because they didn't care for all the food that I made, I know. And I had no idea what I was doing either, but I cooked all that stuff. And that gave me a different perspective on things. And I had memorized what Julia's kitchen was like. And to be able to actually step into it and to know what was in all the cabinets because I had studied that. And it was just like my dream to visit that kitchen. And I got to go in there and not only visit it, but I got to cook in it. And I was there on her 82nd birthday. And on my 82nd birthday, all I hope is that I can be as vibrant and dynamic as that woman was. She shot 2 shows on her 82nd birthday, and then we all went out to eat to celebrate her birthday. and she was the last one at the table. She was just having the time of her life. And I will tell you that during the night before, we were invited to go back to her place and just share a simple meal with her, which was another incredibly memorable moment of my life. But she hopped up from the table constantly to go look things up. This was pre-internet, to go look things up in an encyclopedia or in a dictionary, because she was infinitely curious. And infinite curiosity is what I think kind of keeps us all young. So thank you for that question. It's not something I revisit very often, but it was one of the best moments of my entire life. From Patrick James B. Which Vitamix do you use at home? And how do you rate it? I don't care what the Vitamix is; they're all good. I mean, there's the like through the restaurant supply houses. Vitamix will do a very basic model that you can get for much less than you can get the Vitamixes in some of the cookware shops and stuff like that, or online. And those are what we use at our restaurant, and they work just as good as the fancier models. So if money is an issue for you, then I would say, go to some of the like Restaurant Depot kind of places and see what they have there, and see if they have the really basic Vitamixes. It's the power of the motor that you need, not necessarily all the bells and whistles that they put on the other ones. I oftentimes don't care for a lot of bells and whistles on things, because I think they kind of they don't allow me to have as much control as I want to have. So on off and on off switch, a high low, and then just a simple dial to go from 0 to 10 is all I'm really looking for. I'm a huge fan. Everybody knows I'm a huge fan of Vitamix because they make my life so much easier. Make sure if you do get one, you can also, for home use, get a smaller cup on it, the blender jar. You can get a smaller one, and I will say it's not absolutely necessary, but I love it. I use it at home all the time, and the stick that goes down in it, for the big cup, when you're doing dry mixtures and you're pulverizing those things, I'll tell you, I rarely get out my electric spice grinder anymore, because I just do all my spices there in the Vitamix. Okay, now I'm going to go over here and look at a whole bunch more questions that you guys have asked just in real time here. Those were my seeded questions. This is coming from Carolyn Dillman. Can you make your own powder with the chili pods in the Vitamix? Well, I just answered that. Absolutely, but you don't want to put them in there just straight. You want to dry them out a little bit. So my suggestion is always about a 300-degree oven, just to dry them out for 10-15 minutes. It depends on how moist the chilies are. When they come out of the oven, and it may take you, like with anchos that tend to be a kind of moister chili, you might want to leave them in there for a little bit longer. But when they start to get kind of crispy feeling in the oven, take them out, and then let them cool off for a minute. And when they cool off, they get sort of brittle. That's what you're looking for. And so at that point, you can just break them into big pieces, drop them into the Vitamix, and then using that stick to keep everything moving in there, you just make your powder in there, and that will be good, really good chili powder. Okay, Big says, would you recommend getting a large molcajete for making guacamole and chunkier salsa, or is a fork and or a food processor sufficient? A molcajete does something completely different than a food processor. The food processor chops everything, and the molcajete is rock against rock crushing. When you crush things, you get a very different flavor out of them. So making your salsa de molcajete in the molcajete, you're going to get something that will have a completely resonant flavor, where not all of the flavors come out when you do that in a food processor. Do I use a food processor? All the time. I don't crush everything like that. But it's kind of funny thing. Like in our restaurants, we can't crush all of the stuff for making some of the salsas in the molcajete. So what we'll do is roast garlic and roast green chilies, and we'll pound those in the mortar. And then we'll use the food processor to sort of coarsely chop the roasted tomatoes, and then we'll mix them all together, and then you get a little bit of both of those things, and I think that works out pretty well. But I will say that um, you dropped guacamole in there, which is total red flag for me. I hate guacamole made in a molcajete, because when you crush onions and then mix in the avocados, I hate that flavor. I think that that is not a good thing. If you want to take some roasted garlic and green chilies, just like I talked about, and crush those, and then mash some avocados in there, and then mix in a little bit of chopped tomato and some chopped onion and some chopped cilantro, then that would be okay with me. But this whole thing of doing everything in the molcajete, I think it makes bad guacamole. And I know it's a big show and lots of people like to do it, but it's not my thing at all. I'm just being very honest with all of that. Anthony B says, question about I make mole and I blister the chilies. Are the chili skins supposed to get burnt? No. No, when you are there's two different ways that you're going to toast chilies for mole. One is the dry toasting in a skillet with no oil. The other is an oil toasting. A lot of people, like for making mole poblano, will do the oil toasting. It gives a more thorough toast to things, and the flavor of the dry toasted is a bit more rustic. I love them both. I'm just going to be honest. I love them both, but in neither case should they look burnt. Okay, that's not the point. It's to toast. It's just like if you're making a piece of toasted bread. Okay, you don't have to take it all the way burnt to have it toasted. And in fact, most of us, well, and everybody's got their own favorite, but it's like some people like really lightly toasted bread, and some people like sort of more darkly toasted bread. I like darkly toasted bread, but at the same time, I don't want it to be burnt. And so, what you're going to get with the really dark spots, like the burnt spots on those chilies, is the flavor of burn. So that is not where you're headed for. When you're making black mole, which is the hardest one in the world to do, you are doing a control burn, and it is really hard to master. I have a video on how to do it, and I take you through it, but I'll tell you, it took me 10 years to master it. 10 full years of making that mole before I ever served it in our restaurant, because I didn't think it was good enough. And it's that you're toasting very dark without burning. Maxwell B says, Rick, can you tell us about working at your family's barbecue joint? Okay, so you work at a joint, okay? I know a lot of people call barbecue places barbecue joints, but I worked at a full-fledged restaurant, okay? And I loved every minute of it. I started working there when I was about 7, and I spent almost every Saturday out there. They would let me do all kinds of things, and then we had a catering side of our operation, and I started going on the catering things, and I served drinks and bus tables and stuff like that. What we did was very much of a family kind of operation, and so we had a big pit. Pardon me. And we cooked over hickory, and we actually had 2 big pits. One of them that we only used on special occasions. It was the original pit, but it wasn't the best pit. My father built another pit that was better later on, and that was the one that we used every day and the most. And I will say that I grew up with like the smell of hickory smoke impregnated in all of my clothes, and it is still like one of the strongest and most enjoyable aromas that I come across anywhere. But I grew up in that where everything smelled like that sweet hickory smoke. And then we had we had about 10 different hot sides, and about, I'm going to say, almost 15 different cold sides. So, and every single thing was made from scratch. It wasn't a fancy restaurant at all, but it was one, I think, of integrity, and I think that's where I learned about integrity. And I still, we in our restaurants here in Chicago, we make everything from scratch because that's what was instilled in me. And I tell this story constantly, and I will tell it right now because it may ring a bell for some people. Every day before our restaurant opened at lunchtime, my father stood at the front door and he walked through the place just like a customer would, looking at everything from the customer's perspective. And then he went behind the line and he tasted everything on the line to make sure that it was exactly right. And then he would go and unlock the front door. And that's the best lesson I've ever learned. Steve H says, do you eat Chicago deep dish pizza? And the answer to that is you should all follow Steve Dolinsky and learn about Chicago pizza. Deep dish was really developed mostly for the tourists in Chicago. It's not necessarily, I mean, it is a thing in Chicago and there are people who do it, but the original Chicago pizza is really tavern style pizza, which is really thin crust and cut into squares. And I will say that I'm way more fond of tavern style pizza than I am the deep dish. I find sometimes deep dish is just too much for me. I went with some friends to over to a newer one. It's not a real new one, but it's Rich D'Amato. I mean Rich Labriola's place right off Michigan Avenue. It's just called Labriola, and this is a guy that I've known for years and years and years, who's an amazing baker, and so he decided to do a place. He does both tavern style and he does the deep dish, and so we went over there because a friend of mine said, no, I think his is the best deep dish in town. And so we went over there and ate it. And I ate my one piece and then I was kind of like full because it tends to be kind of heavy for me. But if you go to a place like Pat's, one of the original places for tavern style pizza, you'll see another side of things. And I think it's just like really delicious. That's not the only kind of pizza we have in Chicago because there's Neapolitan pizza and we have a bunch of people doing Detroit style pizza. And so I think that as Steve Dolinsky would say, we live in Pizza City, USA, and that's a really cool thing to be in. And I love pizza. But I tell you, I mostly make it at my house. So I go out for pizza list and I make it at home. Adam G says, is there a particular region of Mexico that you feel has delicious food that doesn't get the attention it deserves? If so, any dishes in particular? Okay, so I will still say that there is kind of like this. So Mexico City is like a great place for cuisine. And anybody coming from a big city in the United States will understand Mexico City because it's got all the contemporary stuff, it's got traditional stuff. It's a real hub for all kinds of cuisine. I just absolutely love being in Mexico City. But it doesn't have the charm of a place like Puebla or Oaxaca or Veracruz. So if you look at this sort of triangle in Mexico that starts in Mexico City, and then it goes straight east to the Gulf Coast. Okay, you'll go right straight through the city of Puebla. You go through all the way over to Veracruz. And then if you come down straight south of Mexico City to form the triangle, and you go to Oaxaca and then back up to Mexico City, that is a great place to explore cuisine. I will say that is kind of, I don't know, for me, the epicenter, but that sort of it discounts how great the food can be in so many other places. There's loads of people that love the food in Michoacan. So when Mexico, when Mexico's cuisine was declared part of the patrimony of humanity and was given this incredible designation, the first of all of the countries now that have been designated, it was all based on Michoacan food, not Oaxacan food. And it was because the people that went to the wherever it is in the Hague, I think it is, where UNESCO, where they went to UNESCO and said, we have this intangible culture. It is our cuisine. And it's not just architecture or ruins that need to be designated, but something intangible like cuisine needs to be designated also as part of the patrimony of humanity. And they got the designation. And Mexico was the first country to actually get that designation. And it was all based on the food of Michoacan, but people don't talk much about the food of Michoacan. But it's very different than the rest of Mexico, and it can be incredibly delicious. But so can the cuisine in so many places. If you look at the tiniest state in Mexico, the the which is the smallest, Delaware or Rhode Island? But anyway, the smallest state in Mexico is Tlaxcala, and it is just adjacent to Puebla. And the food is similar to Puebla, but the people are staunchly fierce about how different it is. And I have eaten some incredible meals in Tlaxcala. So that one's underrated too. When you go and visit people in the north that have that really understand the local cuisine, it's a sort of spread out place up in the north. But you can find incredible things up there. If you go to Tampico and you understand the seafood that's in Tampico, it's amazing. So I could go on and on and on, but I will just say that there are many places. The little triangle that I talked about, that's where a lot of people start, and it's fine if that's where you stay. I keep going back to that triangle all the time. Dusty Matthews says, any tips on using maseca for tortillas? My tortillas bubble. They're fine, but something is off. Should I need the dough? No, you never need the dough. I use a nonstick. Should I use a pan that holds better heat? Oh, that's really tough to answer in this kind of a format. I will say that it's like bread baking. Okay, so it's really hard to learn it without me being right there and touching the dough with you. So if your tortillas bubble when you lay them down right the very first time, when you unmolded the tortilla from the plastic and you lay it down on the hot surface, if they bubble, it's too hot. Okay, that's the first indication that it's too hot. But you also have to know that after the second time, when you flip it, that needs to be hotter. So it's really easiest if you will work on two different temperatures. So it shouldn't bubble when you lay it down, but then when you flip it, it should brown. And then the second time you flip it, it should actually start to balloon up some. Now, it doesn't have to balloon up completely like pita bread, although if it's an absolutely perfect tortilla, it will. And that just makes it lighter and more delicious in a lot of ways. It's harder to get that sort of ballooning or that nice bubbling on the second flip if you're using maseca and not fresh masa. Fresh masa is way easier to work with. So if you ever have the opportunity to go to a tortilleria that actually boils corn and grinds it and makes their own fresh masa, not somebody that's just rehydrating masa harina, then I would highly recommend that you do it just to get a sense of what that's like. It's always my encouragement to the people who are really in love with Mexican food to just try it one time. Find the opportunity to go to a tortilleria and buy the masa and take it home. Now, masa, the thing about masa is that it really does spoil within 24 hours or so. So it's not easy to say, oh, I'm going to go on a trip to X town, buy the masa, put it in my friend's refrigerator, then fly home 2 days later and make these beautiful tortillas, because by that point it will have been soured. And that's the reason most people use masa harina, because you can mix it up right before that you do it. So maseca is designed specifically to have no regional flavor. So basically, it means it's going to be the blandest masa that you can have. And that's so that it can appeal to the people in the Yucatan Peninsula that are used to a very different kind of corn out there. But the same masa harina can be sold in Oaxaca, and everybody thinks it tastes okay. It's not distinctive in flavor. So they kind of strip it of flavor so that it's not offensive to anyone. Okay. So I will say that for those of you that want to taste what some regional corn tastes like, made into masienda, made into masa harina, masa flour, then masienda, MASIENDA, .com is a place that you can go and you can buy masa harina made from different regional heirloom corns. So I'll recommend that to everybody because it's a really good resource. The other thing that I'm going to recommend to you is that they also have a little kit that they have that's got 2 or 3 different kinds of masa harina in it, so you can taste tortillas made from different ones. They have an amazing tortilla press that's made in Oaxaca that'll be really interesting. It may be out of your price range because you can go to most Mexican grocery stores and find ones that are less expensive. Whatever you can afford, do that. But I will tell you about that. They also have a pozole kit at Hacienda that I think is just a great thing to have. So they give you the whole corn kernels. They give you the calcium hydroxide, the cal, to cook with those kernels. And then they have this really cool oregano from Oaxaca in there, and then Oaxacan pasilla, chile pasilla oaxaqueño, the smoky chile pasilla from Oaxaca to make your pozole out of. And so it's like an inexpensive kit that is just absolutely wonderful. If you're looking for a unique gift for people at Christmas time, I know I'm going to give it to a bunch of people. So that would be my recommendation there. What kind of a comal to cook on? Cook on whatever you can, but the ones that hold and distribute heat the best are going to be the best ones for you to work on. Like I have a cast aluminum that has a nonstick coating on it that works actually quite well. But typically I use a cast iron comal that fits over 2 burners on my stove, and that works out the best for me. Okay, now we're going to go on to some new questions here. Angelica S. says, what happened to your culinary training program? It's getting ready to be relaunched. COVID happened to our culinary training program, only COVID. So after the first of the year, we are going to be relaunching Impact Culinary Training over at the Hatchery in the west side of Chicago, over near Garfield Park. And we are going to start that whole thing up. And it's the chef's training program in the sense that we have chefs from all over Chicago coming there to do classes for the students. We have a curriculum that we go through, but then we have guest instructors that come in. It is a short program. Right now it's designed as an 8-week program, and it's just to get people to the first stages. So rather than, and because a whole lot of people cannot afford to go to the expensive culinary schools, but there are so many people with so much talent that we wanted to give them the absolute best opportunity to get into good kitchens. Sorry about that. But we give them 8 weeks of solid training, and then we give them 4 weeks in one of the best restaurants in Chicago, working with one of the chefs that has come out and taught in that program. So we call it the Chef's Training Program because it's chefs of Chicago that are training these people and getting them into their kitchens. And right now, with the labor shortage, I think you could probably all imagine that we're very anxious to really be able to offer a solid foundation for students that perhaps wouldn't have the opportunity to go to full culinary school. Although, the truth of the matter is we've had a bunch of kids come out of that, work for a year, and then get a great scholarship to a great culinary school. But at that point, they really had everything that they needed to get into that culinary program. G Max says, sometimes when I make your roasted tomatillo salsa, the consistency is off, either too loose or too thick. Can you offer some thoughts on how to correct the consistency? Number one, make sure that you roast the tomatillos enough. Because if they're not fully roasted, the liquid that is the moisture that is inside of them will be loose moisture and it will make the salsa watery. So make sure that they're cooked all the way through. Then you will probably have to add a little bit of water to it after you put it in your food processor or your blender to do the blending part of it. But it has to do with cooking them all the way through. And so you're actually you're changing the texture of the tomatillo by cooking it, but at the same time you're also reducing a lot of the water in it. And so just because of the heat that you're using to roast it. So that is my guess exactly what's going on with yours. If they're not completely roasted all the way through, you're getting a watery consistency. If it's too thick, that's easy. You can just dribble a little bit of water in there and make it the right consistency. Okay, Maxwell, I'm not sure how to pronounce your last name, Lueke, Luki. I probably butchered your name. I'm sorry about that. How do you care for your comal? How do you keep the seasoning correct and the black grime from building up? Okay, so black grime shouldn't be there. So if you're roasting tomatillos on a comal or tomatoes on a comal, that's when the black grime comes, and I avoid it by laying a piece of foil on there and roasting on the foil so that I don't wreck the comal. So if your comal, I'm assuming, okay, I'm just going to say I'm assuming that your comal is a cast iron comal. And if it is a cast iron comal, then it needs to be treated like any kind of cast iron pan. The comal is, or the cast iron, when it's brand new, let's just say that most of the cast iron that you get now is pre-seasoned, which means that you don't have to go through the more laborious thing of heating it, oiling it, cooling it down, heating it, oiling it, cooling it down. So let's say it's already pre-seasoned. That doesn't mean that it's seasoned forever. So what I do with mine is if anything sticks on it as it's cooling down, then I put a little bit of salt on there, granulated salt on there, and a paper towel. I use that as my abrasive to get it off. Now, if that doesn't work, then I will take a scrubby pad to it and see if I can get that off. But I first try to do it in the more gentle way, which would be using salt as an abrasive on it. So at that point, then I will usually heat it back up, turn it off, and then rub it with oil, let it cool down, and then wipe off excess oil. Now, if it really seems like it's getting to, now, if I need to wash it or a cast iron pan or anything like that, I'm not one of those people that says you should never wash it. Everybody sort of gasps that, oh, you're putting it in your sink and, oh, you're getting some soap on it and all that. If it's a well-seasoned cast iron pan, none of that stuff is really going to hurt it. I have a cast iron pan that my mother got for a wedding present. So this thing is like 80 years old. And it is so beautifully seasoned that you really can't do anything to harm the thing because it has been heated up and cooled down with oil so much that it has this just beautiful consistency to it. It feels like, well, silk. It feels like silk. Number one, it's really well-made cast iron. Some of the cast iron that's out there is porous now, and it's coming from places where they're not making it in the sort of old artisan way. But I think the one from my mother is one that's really in great shape. But anyway, I will just say that I will put my cast iron pans in the sink and run water in them. Do I scrub them with soap and water? No, but I don't care if any soap gets in there. Sometimes if there's something a little sticky and I've got soap on a sponge or whatever, I'll go in there with that. And I just don't scrub them, okay? But then after I've washed them all out and everything, I put them on the fire and I heat them up and I let all the moisture go away. And then at that point, when I get them hot, I turn off the fire. Let them cool for just a second and then just coat them with oil. When they've completely cooled down, just wipe that off, and that will be kind of where you need to be, I think. Okay, we've got three questions more because we're running out of time here. And again, I will say thank you to all of you for joining us. These are just amazing questions, and it's so fun for me to be able to answer directly things that are on your mind. Philip K says, I have pork lard from the Mexican market that they use for making carnitas. That's pretty much what you're going to find in, unless you get the commercial stuff that's hydrogenated, and I don't ever recommend that. Should I filter that? Okay, so when they make carnitas, they're putting salty pork in there. Okay, so your lard is going to be salty. And it's so delicious. And would I necessarily use it for frying a whole lot of stuff? I mean, it's so amazing in beans. It's so amazing when you use that stuff to cook mole in. Um, it's not very, I would never use it for pie crust or anything like that. It's way too broken down for that. And it's more of a, you think of lard flavoring agent. That's kind of what it is. Okay. So it will have little pieces of meat in there, which is not a bad thing if you're using it for the fried beans or maybe even in mole. But you might want to heat it all up. What the way I would do it is I'd put it in the microwave on 50% power and put it in for a minute at a time until it was melted, and then pour it through a coffee strainer or a fine mesh strainer. And then you'll get all that the little residue. But the residue is really good stuff, so you might want to keep that separate for adding to beans or something like that. That can be super delicious. But it's special stuff. Okay. So at our restaurants, we use really, really nice lard that comes from one of our local farms that does all of the pigs for our restaurant, all the pork products for our restaurant, and they render it. And so when he first started rendering pork lard for us, he did it at a very low temperature to make what we would call perfect Midwestern lard, the kind that would win a prize at the state fair. But that's the stuff that would really be used for making pie crusts and that sort of thing. And they want the absolute least porky flavor in it. In Mexico, pardon me, they don't. They like the porky flavor in it, the roast pork flavor in it. And so they tend to to render all of their lard at high temperatures, and so you get more of a roasty flavor in it. So we taught our pig farmer how to do that high temperature rendering, and now I think we have the best lard in the world. But it's not salty and roasty in the same way as that carnitas fat that they sell at the Mexican grocery stores. For many years, that's what we used in our restaurant because I thought it was just super delicious until we started working with this one farm. Mona G says, any tips on how or what I'm doing wrong with my chiles rellenos? I seem to always tear them too much when I'm filling them. Man, it's hard. So the recipe that I do where you actually blister them in the oil that you're going to fry them in will give you the least cooked flesh. So if you're roasting the poblanos over a flame, that always cooks the flesh more, and it's really hard not to rip them up. Second thing that I'll tell you, and this is in my recipe that I did, it's in Mexico one plate at a time. Well, it's actually a version of it is in my very first book, Authentic Mexican, but this version that I think is more doable is in Mexico one plate at a time. And I always suggest that since you're going to fry these things, that blister the chili in the oil that you're going to use to fry them, and then that doesn't cook them very much, and then very carefully, peel the skin off and then open them up, and then the next step is to fill them, and then I like to kind of sew them shut, so literally overlapping the two sides of the chili a little bit and putting a toothpick through that, and then putting them in the freezer for a little bit to firm them up, and then that kind of holds them together, and then you can dip them into the batter and then fry them. And I find that is the best way to keep them together. So maybe those tips will help you, but just know that it's really hard. I think making chiles rellenos is one of the hardest things in Mexico, in Mexican cooking, but it is one of the things everybody loves, but you just have to keep doing it until you feel like you've got the techniques all down. But look at that recipe in Mexico, one plate at a time, for all those kinds of details. Okay, this is from Tristanosaurus. I think I pronounced that right. I heard that you had a background in anthropology. Does that ever influence your cooking and relationships with food? Like every day, like everything that I do. So when you work in anthropology, your goal is to be a participant observer. If you're just an observer, then you don't get deeply enough into the culture to actually understand it from the inside. And so it's a very hard thing to be an anthropologist, because either anthropologists tend to get so deeply into the culture that they can't see the bigger picture, or they stand apart from it so much that they're making comments on the culture that, well, they just sound sort of colonial, if you will. I mean, they're looking from the outsider's perspective, and they're looking through the lens of another culture. So as an anthropologist, your goal is to get deeply enough into the culture that you see it from the inside, but also maintain enough perspective that you can comment on it from the outside. And it's one of the things that, like, when a lot of times my Mexican friends want to teach me about cooking something, they will leave out massive amounts of the details of it, because they're looking from the inside. And, well, of course, you know this, and you know this, and you know, I don't have to tell you that. It's the kind of thing that when a lot of Mexican cooks will tell you about a recipe, they won't tell you that it has onions and garlic in it, because onions and garlic go into every sauce. So why would you tell that? Because everyone would already know that kind of thing. So you want to, as an anthropologist, be able to get deeply enough into it. And so when I moved to Mexico with the idea of writing my first book, I thought, oh, in a year. Now, remember, I have an undergrad degree in Spanish language, literature, and Latin American studies. And then I have advanced degrees in anthropology and linguistics. And so I decided to, I was working on my PhD dissertation in linguistics and anthropology. And I decided to take a year off because I kind of gone back to my roots and decided to put my love for Mexico with my love for for food. And I was just going to, like, I put my dissertation on hold, and I said, I want to write a book on regional Mexican cooking, because I don't think that people in the United States understand the depth of this culture. So I want to do this. I said, I think I can just do it all in a year. 5 years later, I finished that project, and it was an incredible project, because what I had learned in anthropology is that you got to get so deeply into it that you understand it from the inside. And because Mexico is so regional, I had to travel to every single state in the Republic, cook with local cooks, try to understand it through their eyes. And that was just scratching the surface. And now here I am 40 years later, still doing the same thing, still doing that sort of anthropological work when I go to Mexico. So I wanted to just say, and this is a good place to end this conversation, I think, is that cooking isn't a recipe. Okay, a recipe is a blueprint. So if you think that anybody that takes a blueprint can build a house, then you're completely wrong, because you actually have to know how to build. The blueprint won't tell you how to build, it'll just tell you the proportions of everything that's going on in that. So our recipes are our best way to communicate to people who understand how to cook, how to make these dishes. And even then, they're not very thorough. They're not very complete. They don't give us the insight that being in the culture and cooking the stuff with somebody that hasn't grown up with that stuff would have. So what I try to do, and the reason that I don't give you a recipe without a head note and lots of notes in it and everything, is because my recipe is a blueprint. And then I got to give you the context where you're going to find this stuff. And I got to give you an idea as to, like, when you go to a Mexican grocery store, what are you going to find? And how do you choose the stuff that people would choose if they had grown up with this stuff? A food of a country is a total expression of their culture. And I know in the United States, we like to play around with other cultures' foods, and we like to say what we like and what we don't like. That's never interested me. I want to see the bigger picture. I want to see the whole thing. And I want to be able to share not only something that I hope you'll love and tastes really good, but I want to share something of the spirit of the culture and the people who have made this, and perhaps when they eat it and how they eat it. And when you're eating at that little tlayuda place on Libres in Oaxaca City, how it's going to come to you and what it's like to sit at that table there and to eat that, and why they put those things on it, and what's the history of that, and why did they develop tlayudas as a sort of dried out, great big 14-inch tortilla that can crisp up over an open fire? It's all of those things that are the most important to me. So I will say thank you for that question, because that's really at the heart of everything that I do. And I will say again to all of you, thank you for being here. I apologize if I didn't get to your question, but we have now exhausted a full hour of rapid fire questions and rapid fire answers. So I hope that you found some of this interesting. Thank you for sticking with us, and we will see you again in a few weeks for another one of these things. Thank you. And that's Casey.